A&E, this is Biography. For January 19th, 2001, Biography with Peter Graves.
With a leer and a wink, he made them laugh all over the world. For nearly 40 years, Benny Hill was one of TV's funniest men. And this is TV Funny Man Week here on Biography. Our look at stars who filled the airwaves with their laughter. Benny Hill's racy skits and slapstick gags were a throwback to an earlier era of music halls and burlesque shows. But he was one of the first comedians to recognize the power of television, and it was the perfect medium for his visual humor, a humor that seemed to translate into any language. You know, while comedy doesn't usually travel well, the Benny Hill Show was a hit in over 100 countries. And yet, if Benny Hill was one of the most widely recognized stars in the world, he remained something of a mystery in his private life, even to those closest to him. To millions of fans, he was the funniest man in the world.
He really knew exactly what he wanted to do. He was a master, a genius.
His childhood dream was to be the star of the show. It was a dream that became an obsession.
The work had always devoured him, really. And that's what he was. He was his work.
He wanted to be as famous as his comic hero, Charlie Chaplin.
He did achieve his ambition, but what a price he had to pay for it, because at the end of the day, he gave up everything and everybody for his stardom.
Voilà, il y a magnifique.
After more than 40 years in show business, Benny Hill received the Charlie Chaplin Award for comedy at his hero's Swiss home in 1991. It was the crowning moment of his life. After the ceremony, Chaplin's son Eugene took Benny to his late father's study.
He couldn't believe he was like in heaven. And I was looking around the room and I went, "Hey, Ben, come here, look at this." And there was his telly and there was his armchair. And I said, "Look," and the rack said, "Benny Hill, Benny Hill, Benny Hill, Benny Hill, Benny Hill." And he went, "Oh, my God, you know, that Chaplin thought that much of me." And Eugene said, "My dad thought you were the greatest."
In Southampton, a busy port on Britain's south coast, Benny Hill was born on January 21st, 1924. Christened Alfred Hawthorne, he was the second child of Helen and Alfred Hill. His brother Leonard was 2 years older, but it was to be 9 years before his sister Diane made the family complete. Benny was his mother's favorite. They shared a love of singing. A quiet woman, she was the bedrock of the family.
He was very fond of his mother. He thought the world of her. She, I suppose, sort of stood up for him against his father when his father became too domineering.
His mother was the biggest influence in his life. His father used to come out into the front garden to do a bit of gardening, and he always wore a beret. That same beret, which I saw later in some of Benny's shows.
The Hills lived in an affluent suburb north of the city. Benny's father managed a shop that sold surgical trusses and other medical goods, including condoms, though they were never mentioned by name. Situated next to Southampton's docks, the shop was very profitable.
There was a quite notorious pub nearby, so I think perhaps it was the place where you might find prostitutes if you were looking for them. And it sold what was then called rubber goods. So it was a bit of a joke that that's where his father was manager. Well, I think the shop did quite well.
Benny's blood was touched by the big top. His father and uncle had both been clowns, but Alfred Sr. was so strict his sons called him the captain.
His father had originally been with a circus before the First War. And then he joined up in the First War and was taken prisoner by the Germans and spent a couple of years in German prison camps. And whenever Benny or any of them complained about the food, he would contrast the wonderful food they were having with what he'd had in the German prison camp.
At 11, Benny won a scholarship to a local school. Not very athletic, he excelled at art, but was not really academically minded. Content with his own company, Benny was something of an enigma to his classmates.
He did live to a certain extent in his own little world, even then. And that's why, perhaps, none of the other boys in the class really ever knew him.
Despite his reserve, his mother encouraged him to join a musical group. Benny played guitar and told jokes which he'd quietly try out first on his school friends.
He would sidle up to you and stand very close to you. Sometimes he might put his arm around you, and he'd tell you perhaps the latest smutty story. He'd sometimes have pictures of girls. They were often glamorous girls. Those were not the girls we were in. I mean, the other boys in the class were interested in girls in the flesh, whereas he seemed to be more interested in pictures of girls. It was the glamour, perhaps, which interested him.
Glamour to Benny meant show business. His family had always taken him to Southampton's theaters, where he was entranced by the touring revues. It was a glimpse into a world he wanted to join.
He said, when I was a kid, my dad used to take me to the variety theatres all the time, and you'd see a touring review, and you'd see a Foldy Rolls type thing. He said, and there was this little sort of chubby guy with a funny hat on, surrounded by beautiful girls, and making everybody in the audience laugh and clap. And he said, even as a kid, I said, I want to be that man.
It was the dream Benny pursued all his life. When World War II broke out in 1939, Benny's school was evacuated, and a year later he dropped out. At 15, and without qualifications of any kind for a job, he started out delivering milk and then found work in a local Woolworth store. He was surrounded by 26 shop girls, but he couldn't impress them with his new job.
He was a trainee manager, but as he said, it was mostly, they'd say, Hill, there's a dog had done something over there by the perfumery. Would you come and pick it? He'd go with a shovel and pick it up, you know. He was learning to be a manager, but from the bottom upwards, you could say.
At 17, Benny sold his guitar and left his hometown to pursue his dream. He set out for London and slept in an air raid shelter for lack of funds before taking his first steps into the world of show business. He became a prop boy and assistant stage manager with a touring revue.
One night, the straight man didn't turn up. He was probably in the pub or something and forgot to come out. And Benny volunteered off his own bat to go on and play the part of a straight man for the comic. And the comic thanked him and said, that was very good, you know, I think you should stay in the business or something like that.
His fledgling career ground to a halt when he was drafted in 1942. The Army trained him to be a mechanic, but as the war ended, he saw an opportunity to get back on stage, and he transferred to the Army's Entertainments Division, where his saucy humor went down well. One night in Germany, the colonel in charge of Forces Entertainment came to see the show.
Benny was in a Stars in Battle dress party. He was actually the second comic and the driver of the lorry. And I went to a little tiny, beautiful little theatre, the Schloss Theatre in Celle. And the local entertainments officer had said that Benny was not to do his act because he didn't think he was funny. But the sergeant in charge, another comic, said, I think you better do it tonight because the colonel's in front. I thought he was very funny, so I went round to see him and I said, listen, you and I are not going to be in the army forever. I'm going to be an agent. I expect you're going to be a comedian. You better come and see me when you come out of the army.
By the time he was signed up by Colonel Stone, Alf Hill became Benny Hill, after the popular comedian Jack Benny.
I sent Benny to audition, and Peter Sellers was at the audition, and I think he beat Peter Sellers to the job. And he went down to Margate to feed Reg Varney,
Reg Varney was one of Britain's top variety comedians. He needed a new stooge.
After our first performance, I thought, this is going to be good, you know. But I didn't realise how good he was going to be until we'd been together for quite a few weeks. And we had this rapport, which was uncanny. But he was so quick, it wasn't true. And he was a brilliant writer.
For 3 seasons, their partnership blossomed, but Benny's ambition was to be the star of the show like Reg. When he got the chance, he found the stage to be a very lonely place.
Strange thing, when he was feeding me, playing characters, he was fantastic. Brilliant, to say the least. But as soon as he went on to do his own act, to be himself, no good. No good whatsoever. The public didn't like him.
Benny got less laughs the farther north he traveled. It was a famous graveyard for London comics. He persevered, but his lack of success made him ill. Reg passed on advice to help his partner get over his stage fright.
I went to this fellow who taught me how to relax and showed me what to do and that. And I was telling Benny, I said, it's marvellous. He said, it's not that. He said, I can't sleep either at night. I said, well, you won't do, because you're worried about the performance. And I showed him what to do and told him what to do. And in the morning at breakfast, I said, how'd you get on with the relaxing then, Ben? He said, yeah. He said, I tried it. He said, but after a while, when it wasn't working, I turned over and went to sleep.
I used to dread playing up north. I really did. It was, it used to frighten me to death to have to go up north. I don't know why, whether it was my fault or what, but I never seemed to click playing up north.
It was at a theatre in the north of England that Benny starred with Reg Varney for the last time.
I'm in the dressing room and I thought, he's going well. And he was getting clapped, and, you know, but when I listened, it was all together. And I'd never heard the slow hand clap before in all my life, you see. And it's a terrifying thing to hear. And when he came off, he was ill, very ill, in a sink. And the manager came in, he said, you've got a rotten act, haven't you? And he said, well, what shall I do, Mr. Chow? He said, get off as quick as you can.
With the loss of his solo act, Benny left the tour. He was disheartened, but still determined.
He came back and he sat in his garden in his mother's house in Southampton. And he sat there for 2 or 3 months, I think. It was a beautiful summer. And he wrote hundreds of sketches. And he took them up to Ronnie Wardman of the BBC. And he said, oh, Mr. Wardman, you look at that. He said, you can, I think you'll find there's some good stuff there. That, and he said, I'm guaranteed. And Ronnie Wardman looked at him, and that's where he got the job on television.